You've already lived your life, now get lost." My son Kevin screamed those words at me in front of 100 people at his anniversary party, and the whole country club went silent. I stood there in my work clothes, paint still under my fingernails from fixing up a rental property, watching my only child tell me I was an embarrassment to his perfect life. 24 hours later, I walked into the county clerk's office and changed every deed, every title, every piece of paper that had his name on it. I sat in my truck in that country club parking lot afterward, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. 69 years old, 40 years of building something from nothing, and my own son thought I was trash to be thrown away. The sound of laughter and music drifted from the party inside. The party I was no longer welcome at. The celebration of a marriage I'd helped pay for with money my boy thought I didn't have. If you've ever been thrown away by someone you'd die for, if you've ever been told your life doesn't matter by the person whose life you made possible, then pull up that chair and stay a while. This story's got betrayal that cuts bone deep and justice that comes with interest. Sometimes the people who should honor us most are the ones who need to learn our worth the hardest way possible. I'd been looking forward to that anniversary party for weeks. 5 years of Kevin's marriage to Stephanie, and I thought maybe, finally, they'd accepted me as family. I'd bought a new shirt, even considered getting my hair cut professional-like. But then I got that emergency call about the water pipe bursting in my Elm Street rental, and I couldn't let my tenants, a young family with 2 babies, go without running water over the weekend. So I showed up late, still in my work clothes, hands clean but carrying the honest smell of a man who'd spent his day fixing what was broken. The looks I got walking through that club made me feel like I was trespassing in my own son's life. These people with their designer clothes and perfect smiles looked at me like I was something that had crawled out of their worst nightmare about where their money came from. But I'd built something in this city. 8 properties, all paid for, all generating income that would set my family up for generations. Every broken pipe I'd fixed, every wall I'd painted, every tenant I'd helped had been an investment in Kevin's future. I owned more real estate than half the people in that room, but they saw an old black man in work clothes and decided I didn't belong in their world. The humiliation burned worse than any physical pain I'd ever endured. Here I was, a successful businessman who'd pulled himself up from nothing, being told by my own son that I'd already lived my life and needed to disappear. But Kevin didn't know about the portfolio I'd built in silence, the properties I'd been planning to pass down to him, the legacy I'd constructed one nail and $1 at a time. If you want to know how a father's love can turn to justice and a son's cruelty can cost him millions, then hit that subscribe button. I'm Vernon Mitchell, and this is the story of how my boy learned that respect isn't optional, it's earned, and it can be taken away just as fast as it's given. Kevin was 3 years old when I taught him to hold a hammer, his little hands wrapped around the handle while mine guided the motion. "Gentle but firm, son," I'd tell him, watching his face scrunch up in concentration as we built his first birdhouse together. Those Saturday mornings in my garage workshop were sacred, just me and my boy, creating something beautiful with our hands while his mama made us sandwiches and sweet tea for lunch. After his mother died in that car accident, that workshop became our refuge. Kevin would sit on my workbench doing homework while I repaired cabinets or built furniture for neighbors. "Daddy, why do we always have sawdust in our hair?" he'd ask, and I'd ruffle those curls and say, "Because that's how you know we've been working hard, building something that'll last." He was proud of me then, would brag to his friends that his daddy could fix anything, build anything, make anything beautiful. I worked double shifts at the construction company and spent weekends flipping my first house just to afford Kevin's private school tuition. Every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, every floor I refinished was an investment in his future. "You're gonna have opportunities I never had," I'd tell him, watching him struggle with algebra at our kitchen table. "But you gotta remember where you come from, son. These hands that get dirty are the hands that'll keep you clean." The first property I bought was a rundown duplex on Cherry Street that everyone said was a waste of money. But I saw potential where others saw problems, saw investment where others saw expense. Kevin helped me tear out old carpet and paint walls, complaining the whole time but secretly proud when neighbors stopped to admire our work. "This is ours, son," I'd tell him. "Every board we replace, every room we fix up, this is building our family's future." High school changed everything. Kevin started noticing that his friends' fathers wore suits to work while his daddy came home with calloused hands and paint-stained clothes. "Why can't you get a regular job?" he asked one day, embarrassed when his girlfriend's parents asked what I did for a living. "This is a regular job," I told him. "Just 'cause it's honest work doesn't make it less important." But I could see the shame creeping into his eyes, the way he'd rush his friends past my workshop, past the evidence of how we'd built our life. College made the distance worse. Kevin would come home talking about his classmates' families, doctors, lawyers, executives, and I'd see him measuring his own father against their white-collar success. "I bought another property while you were away," I'd tell him, excited to share my growing business. But he'd just nod politely, more interested in telling me about some internship at a marketing firm than hearing about the investment that would help pay for his education. By the time he graduated and got his executive job, Kevin treated my success like a secret to be hidden. He'd introduce me as my father, without mentioning what I did, would steer conversations away from my business when his colleagues asked questions. The boy who used to beam with pride watching me build cabinets now acted like my accomplishments were somehow beneath his new sophisticated life. I kept buying properties, kept building wealth, but Kevin kept building walls between us that no amount of love seemed able to tear down. The first crack in our relationship came at Kevin's college graduation party. I'd spent weeks planning a celebration at our house, inviting family and neighbors who'd watched him grow up. But Kevin pulled me aside that morning and said, "Dad, Stephanie's parents are coming. Can you maybe dress nice? And don't mention the rental properties. They think that's kind of low class." I stared at my son, the boy I'd raised to be proud of honest work, asking me to hide who I was for people I'd never met. Stephanie came from money, real money, the kind that got passed down through generations instead of earned with bloody knuckles and 16-hour days. Her father was a federal judge. Her mother ran some charity organization, and they looked at me like I was help that had forgotten its place. "So you're in construction," Judge Harrison said during dinner, his tone making it sound like I collected garbage for a living. Kevin jumped in quickly. "Dad's more of a property manager now," like that somehow made my life's work more respectable. The wedding planning was torture. Every decision became about what was appropriate for Stephanie's social circle. When I offered to pay for the reception, Kevin hesitated. "Dad, we appreciate it, but the venue Stephanie wants is pretty expensive. Maybe you could contribute to something smaller?" The boy I'd put through private school was worried I couldn't afford his wedding. I wrote a check for $50,000 and watched his face go white. "Where did you get this kind of money?" he whispered, like I'd robbed a bank instead of building a business. That's when I realized Kevin had no idea what I'd accomplished. He'd been so busy being embarrassed by my work clothes and dirty hands that he'd never bothered to learn about my portfolio. 8 rental properties, all generating steady income, all worth more than his fancy marketing job would make him in 5 years. "I've been buying and fixing houses for 20 years, son," I told him. "This is what happens when you invest wisely and work hard." But instead of pride, I saw calculation in his eyes, like he was doing math about his inheritance. The disrespect became more obvious after the wedding. Family dinners turned into Stephanie complaining about my projects and Kevin agreeing that maybe I should slow down and enjoy retirement. When I'd mention a new property I was considering, they'd exchange looks like I was some old man playing with toy houses. "Dad, at your age, shouldn't you be relaxing?" Kevin would say, not understanding that building my empire was what kept me alive after his mother died. The breaking point came when they bought their house in Myers Park, the expensive neighborhood where Stephanie's friends lived. I offered to help with the down payment, but Kevin said they had it handled. Later, I found out they'd taken out a massive mortgage instead of accepting help from their construction worker father. They'd rather pay interest to strangers than owe anything to the man who'd raised them, educated them, and loved them unconditionally. I stopped mentioning my business ventures after that, stopped trying to include them in my success. If Kevin wanted to pretend his father was just some old handyman puttering around with rental houses, then I'd let him believe that. I kept buying properties, kept building wealth, but I also started building something else. A plan for what would happen to everything I'd created if my own son couldn't respect the man who'd made his privileged life possible. The night that destroyed everything started beautifully. Kevin and Stephanie's 5th anniversary party at the Carolina Country Club was elegant. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, a string quartet playing softly, while Charlotte's elite celebrated my son's marriage. I'd been invited, reluctantly, and told to arrive by 7 sharp. But then Mrs. Johnson called crying about her kitchen flooding, and I couldn't leave an elderly widow with water pouring through her ceiling just to make small talk with people who looked down on me. By the time I arrived at 8:30, the party was in full swing. I'd cleaned up as best I could in my truck, but I still smelled like pipe joint compound and carried the honest scent of a man who'd spent his day solving other people's problems. The valet looked at my pickup truck like it was contaminating the parking lot full of luxury cars. Walking through those club doors in my work clothes felt like entering enemy territory. The moment I spotted Kevin across the crowded ballroom, I knew I'd made a mistake coming. He was laughing with a group of executives, wine glass in hand, playing the part of the successful young professional. When he saw me, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, embarrassment, then something close to panic. Stephanie noticed too, and her perfect smile froze like winter had suddenly swept through the room. I made my way over, dodging waiters with champagne trays and women in designer dresses who stepped aside like I might stain their clothes. "Sorry I'm late, son," I said when I reached Kevin's group. "Had an emergency at one of my properties." The conversations around us stuttered to a halt. These people weren't used to being interrupted by working men who smelled like honest labor instead of expensive cologne. Kevin's jaw tightened. "Dad, this isn't really the time," but I cut him off, extending my hand to his colleagues. "Vernon Mitchell," I introduced myself. "Kevin's father. I own some rental properties around town." The handshakes were reluctant, the smiles forced. One man actually wiped his hand on his jacket after shaking mine, like poverty might be contagious. That's when Stephanie appeared at Kevin's elbow, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Vernon, we weren't expecting you so late," she said through gritted teeth. The accusation in her voice was clear. I was ruining their perfect party just by existing in their world. "Maybe you should have called first," she added, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. The conversations around us grew quieter as people began to stare. Kevin should have defended me then. Should have told his wife and colleagues that his father was a hard-working businessman who'd earned his place anywhere he chose to stand. Instead, he looked around at the watching faces, saw the judgment in their eyes, and made a choice that would haunt both of us forever. "You know what, Dad?" he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "You've already lived your life, now get lost. Stop embarrassing us." The silence that followed was deafening. 100 people in designer clothes stared at the old black man in work gear who'd just been publicly humiliated by his own son. I felt every eye in that room burning into me, saw the mixture of pity and satisfaction on faces that had never known what it meant to build something from nothing. In that moment, Kevin had chosen their approval over my dignity, their acceptance over my love. The boy I'd raised to be better than me had decided I wasn't good enough to share his success. I walked out of that country club with my head high, but inside I was dying. Every step across that marble floor felt like a funeral march for the relationship I'd treasured most in this world. The valet brought my truck around without making eye contact, probably afraid that witnessing my humiliation would somehow implicate him in the scene. I sat in the cab for 15 minutes, watching shadows move behind the ballroom windows, knowing my son was inside explaining away his father like I was some embarrassing family secret. The drive home took forever. Every red light gave me time to replay Kevin's words, to feel them cutting deeper into wounds that would never properly heal. "You've already lived your life, now get lost." Like I was some used-up old man who'd outlived his purpose, instead of the father who'd sacrificed everything to give him the opportunities he now used to shame me. The boy I'd taught to hammer nails had just hammered the final nail into our relationship's coffin. I sat in my driveway until midnight, staring at the house where I'd raised Kevin alone after his mama died. Every room held memories of bedtime stories, homework sessions, father-son talks about dreams and possibilities. The workshop where we'd built his first bookshelf still had his handprints in paint on the workbench, but that little boy who'd been proud of his daddy's calloused hands was gone, replaced by a man who saw those same hands as proof of his father's unworthiness. Sleep wouldn't come that night. I walked through my house touching photographs, remembering better times before Kevin decided I was beneath his new social status. There was his high school graduation picture, where he'd insisted I stand next to him in my best suit. There was the photo from his first apartment where he'd asked me to help him fix a leaky faucet and cook dinner for his girlfriend. When had helping people become something to be ashamed of? When had honest work become a mark of failure? By morning, I'd made my decision. If Kevin thought I was just some embarrassing old man with nothing to offer his perfect life, then perhaps it was time to show him exactly what he'd thrown away. I called my lawyer, Marcus Williams, the young carpenter I'd been mentoring who reminded me of Kevin before money and status poisoned his heart. "Marcus," I said, "I need you to meet me at the county clerk's office this morning. We've got some paperwork to handle." The hardest part wasn't changing the deeds. It was accepting that the son I'd loved unconditionally had conditional love for me. Every property I signed over to Marcus felt like another piece of my heart being transferred. Another dream I'd had for Kevin being redirected to someone who actually valued what I'd built. 8 properties, worth nearly $3 million going to a young man who called me Mr. Vernon with respect instead of a son who called me an embarrassment. Rosa Martinez, my neighbor and friend for 20 years, found me sitting on my porch that afternoon. "Mijo, you look like someone died," she said, settling into the chair beside me. When I told her what had happened, what I'd done, her eyes filled with tears. Vernon, that boy doesn't know what he lost. But maybe someday he'll understand that you don't throw away the people who love you most." She was right about one thing. Kevin would understand eventually. The question was whether understanding would come too late for forgiveness to mean anything to either of us. The revelation came 3 weeks later when Kevin called, his voice shaking with disbelief and anger. "Dad, what the hell did you do? I just got a letter from some lawyer saying you transferred all your properties to Marcus Williams? This has to be some kind of mistake." The desperation in his voice told me he'd finally done the math, finally realized that his embarrassing father owned nearly $3 million in real estate, that he'd just signed away to someone who actually respected him. I let the silence stretch between us before answering. "No mistake, son. You said I'd already lived my life and should get lost. Well, I got lost, along with everything I was planning to leave you." Kevin started sputtering excuses, talking about how he was drunk, how Stephanie had been pressuring him, how he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But we both knew he'd meant every word in that moment, when his colleagues' approval mattered more than his father's dignity. The full extent of what he'd lost hit him when his accountant called later that week. Kevin had been counting on inheriting my properties to pay off the massive mortgage on his Myers Park house, the student loans Stephanie was still carrying, the credit card debt from trying to keep up with her wealthy friends. "You've destroyed our financial future," Stephanie screamed at me over the phone. "How could you do this to your own family?" The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd been embarrassed by my low-class rental properties was now furious about losing them. Marcus Williams proved himself worthy of my trust in ways Kevin never had. The first thing he did was offer me a partnership, keeping me involved in the business I'd built while honoring my decision to change ownership. "Mr. Vernon, you taught me everything I know about this business. These properties should still be ours together." His respect for my experience and wisdom showed me what a real son should be like, what Kevin could have been if pride hadn't poisoned his heart. The Charlotte Observer picked up the story when word spread through the real estate community about my unprecedented transfer of wealth. "Local carpenter builds $1 million portfolio, gives it away after son's public humiliation," read the headline. The article detailed my 40-year climb from construction worker to property mogul, and how I'd chosen to pass my legacy to a mentee instead of blood family. The comments section exploded with people sharing their own stories of ungrateful children and chosen family being stronger than blood. Kevin showed up at my house after the article published, tears streaming down his face, and apologies pouring from his mouth like water from a broken pipe. "Dad, I was wrong. I was stupid. I let Stephanie and her friends get in my head about what success looks like. Please, there has to be a way to fix this." But some things can't be fixed with tears and sorry words. Trust once shattered leaves scars that never fully heal. The conversation that ended everything came when Kevin suggested we could work something out, if I'd reconsider the transfers. "Maybe we could split the properties," he said. "Give Marcus half and keep half for family." That's when I knew he still didn't understand. This wasn't about money or property. It was about the moment when he'd looked at his father and decided I was worth nothing. "Son," I told him, "you can't split respect. You either have it or you don't. And in that country club, in front of all those people, you made it clear you don't." The properties were gone, but more importantly, so was the relationship we'd never be able to rebuild. 3 years have passed since that night at the Carolina Country Club, and Kevin hasn't spoken to me since our final conversation about respect and consequences. He and Stephanie had to sell their Myers Park house, move to a smaller place, take on extra work to manage their debt. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about that moment when he chose their approval over my dignity. But wondering doesn't bring back the son I thought I'd raised to be better than that. Marcus Williams has turned those 8 properties into 12, expanding the business with the same vision and work ethic I tried to teach Kevin. He stops by every Sunday for dinner, brings his girlfriend sometimes, asks for advice about investments and life decisions. "Mr. Vernon," he told me recently, "I want to do right by what you built. Your legacy is safe with me." He calls me family not because he has to, but because he chooses to, and that choice means everything. The hardest truth I've learned is that you can't force someone to value you, no matter how much you love them. I spent 40 years building something beautiful for Kevin. 40 years teaching him lessons he refused to learn. 40 years believing that unconditional love would eventually be returned with respect. But love without respect is just enabling. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is show someone the consequences of their choices. People ask me if I regret giving away Kevin's inheritance, if I wish I'd found another way to handle that night. The answer is complicated. I regret that my son became someone who could humiliate his father publicly. I regret that money and status mattered more to him than family. I regret that I failed to raise a man who understood that success built on shame isn't success at all. But I don't regret showing him that actions have consequences, even when they come from your own children. The Charlotte real estate community knows my story now, and it's become a cautionary tale about family, respect, and the price of taking people for granted. Young men like Marcus seek me out for mentorship, and I've started teaching carpentry classes for kids whose parents understand that working with your hands is nothing to be ashamed of. My legacy isn't just in property deeds anymore. It's in the lives I'm helping build with dignity and honest work. Kevin drives past my house sometimes. I see his car slow down, see him looking at the workshop where I taught him to build things that would last. Part of me hopes he'll stop, that we'll find a way to rebuild what his words destroyed. But respect can't be inherited or demanded. It has to be earned, and some lessons come too late to matter. The boy I raised is gone, replaced by a man who learned the value of his father's love only after he'd thrown it away. So tell me in the comments, have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone you'd die for? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and demanding respect? Have you ever discovered that the people you love most see your sacrifices as embarrassments instead of gifts? This story changed my life and taught me that family is about honor, not just blood. If it resonated with something in your heart, hit that subscribe button and share your own story in the comments below. I'm Vernon Mitchell, and I've got more tales about building dreams, surviving betrayal, and learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices. Thanks for listening to An Old Man's Truth.